good afternoon, good evening, whatever time zone you are in the world. I welcome you to the month of July's webinar presented by Orgasm Reform Institute. And this month, we are going to be talking about sexual rights. Continuing from where we stopped last month, I said sexual rights are supposed to be protected, demanded, and known. And a good number of people do not know their sexual right. And when you don't know your sexual right, how will you protect this right? When you don't know your sexual right, how will you demand for this right? So today we are going to be doing an in-depth study on sexual rights, and this is gotten from IPPF declaration. Now, IPPF is a global service provider and a leading advocate of sexual and reproductive health and rights for all. They are a worldwide movement of national organizations working with and for communities and individuals. They work towards a world where women, men, and young people everywhere have control over their own bodies and therefore their destinies. A world where they are free to choose parenthood or not, free to decide how many children they will have and when, free to pursue healthy sexual lives without fear of unwanted pregnancies and sexually transmitted infections, including HIV. A world where gender or sexuality are no longer a source of inequality or stigma. IPPF will not retreat from doing everything they can to safeguard these important choices and rights for current and future generations. So today we are going to be learning about what IPPF says about sexual rights. Sexuality is a natural and precious aspect of life, an essential and fundamental part of our humanity. For people to attain the highest standard of health, they must first be empowered to exercise choices in their sexual and reproductive lives. They must feel confident and safe in expressing their own sexual identity. Today, discrimination, stigma, fear, and violence pose real threats to many people. These threats and the actions they trigger, ranging from disheartening to life-threatening in nature, prevent many people from attaining basic sexual rights and health. Sexual rights are a component of human rights. They are an evolving set of entitlements related to sexuality that contribute to the freedom, equality, and dignity of all people, and they cannot be ignored. We must preserve, we must be uncompromising and compassionate in our efforts to decrease stigma and improve access to services, and to increase recognition of sexuality as a positive aspect of human life. Sexual rights and IPPF declaration is an indispensable tool for all organizations, activists, researchers, policy and decision makers who are working to promote and ensure human rights. The declaration will enable members of sexual and reproductive health and human rights communities to create change and build on the momentum that has already begun around sexual rights in preparation for the next International Conference on Population and Development. Too often denied and too often neglected, sexual rights deserve our attention and priority. It is time to respect them. It is time to demand them. And until we know what these rights are, there is no way we can demand, neither protect. And this IPPF declaration contains three parts. The first one is a preamble, the second is 7 guiding principles, and final part contains the sexual rights. which are human rights related to sexuality. The preamble introduces the concept of the declaration in the context of the IPPF's mission and vision, the international agreements and documents relating to sexual and reproductive health and rights and human rights, and also outlines the basic intention of the human rights framework and seven guiding principles which provide a framework for all the sexual rights included in the declaration and will inform and ensure respect, protection and advancement of sexual rights within the Federation. Sexual rights fall within the canon of human rights, which is both universal and indivisible, and they are in accordance with the principles of non-discrimination. And the final part, sexual rights are human rights related to sexuality, outlines the 10 sexual rights, which are constituted by a set of entitlements related to sexuality that emanate from the rights to freedom, equality, privacy, autonomy, integrity, and dignity of all people. Remember earlier I said the goal is to create a world where women, men, and young people everywhere have control over their own bodies. When you have control over your own body, then there is a way you'll be able to control other people to place respect on your body. No one can just have easy access on your body. And like I said in the month of June, that a lot of people believe because they're in a relationship, then they can engage in sexual intercourse. And what people don't know is even if you're in a relationship, you have the right to say no when advances are made. So we want a world where everyone have control over their own bodies and therefore their destinies. And IPPF has made this very easy for individuals, organizations, etc., working in different regions of the world to incorporate this framework and underlying principles of the declaration into their activities, services, and programs. And this will aid any effort to promote, protect, defend, and advance sexual rights, because every single person should know their sexual rights. And convinced that this comprehensive and integrated human rights based approach to sexuality and sexual health will promote the realization of sexual rights as an aspect of global justice, development, and health. We affirm these principles that follow. And remember, these seven guiding principles provide the framework for all the sexual rights included in the declaration. Principle number one, sexuality is an integral part of the personhood of every human being. For this reason, a favorable environment in which everyone may enjoy all sexual rights as part of the process of development must be created. No one can run away from their sexuality. It is part of us. Throughout our lives, we experience our sexualities in different ways according to inner and external factors. Human rights are related to sexuality, and their protection and promotion should be part of daily existence of everyone, everywhere. And also, sexuality should be recognized as a positive aspect of life. There should be an increase in sex positivity. Sexuality is an aspect of human and social life which is engaged always with the body, the mind, politics, health, and society. A sexually sane environment is needed for us to be sexually sane beings. And principle 2 says the rights and protections guaranteed to people under age 18 differ from those of adults, and must take into account the evolving capacities of the individual child to exercise rights on his or her own behalf. Of course, the law recognizes people that are under the age of 18 and adults, and there is a difference between the ways they are related to. And these differences relate to all aspects of human rights, but require particular approaches in regard to sexual rights. The principle of evolving capacity combines respect for children, their dignity and entitlement to protection from all form of harm, while also acknowledging the value of their own contribution towards their protection. Societies must create environments in which children can achieve their optimal capacities and where greater respect is given to their potential for participation in and responsibility for decision making in their own lives. So there is an understanding to relate with those under 18 and those above 18, and helping them on the journey even as they evolve as sexual beings. Now, to the third principle, non discrimination underlines all human rights protection and promotion. Non discrimination. This prohibits any distinction, exclusion, or restriction on the basis of sex, age, gender, sexual history, race, color, ethnicity, language, religion, political, national, social religion, property, birth, health status, including HIV, etc. There shouldn't be discrimination between people. Of course, individuals experience different barriers to the fulfillment of their sexual rights. Substantive equality requires these barriers to be removed in order for diverse individuals to enjoy fundamental rights and freedoms on an equal basis with others. This may require that particular attention be paid to marginalized and underserved groups. Now, to the fourth principle, sexuality and pleasure deriving from it is a central aspect of being human, whether or not a person chooses to reproduce. Sexual health spans a lifetime. Sexuality is an factor in almost all reproductive decisions. However, it is a central aspect of being human, whether or not one chooses to reproduce. It is not merely a vehicle for individuals to satisfy their reproductive interests, and the entitlement to experience and enjoy sexuality independent of reproduction and reproduction independent of sexuality should be safeguarded, paying particular attention to those who historically and in present are denied such an entitlement. And Principle 5 says ensuring sexual rights for all includes a commitment to freedom and protection from harm. So these sexual rights include a commitment to freedom and protection from harm. Sexuality related harm includes both violence and abuse of a physical, verbal, psychological, economic, and sexual nature, as well as violence against individuals because of their sex, age, gender identity, sexual orientation, marital status, sexual history, or how they manifest their sexuality. All children, adolescents are entitled to enjoy the right to special protection from all forms of exploitation. This includes protection from sexual exploitation, child prostitution, and all forms of sexual abuse, violence, and harassment, including forcing of a child to engage in any sexual activity or sexual practice, and the use of children in pornographic performances and materials. And Principle 6 says sexual rights may be subject only to those limitations determined by law for the purpose of securing due recognition and respect for the rights and freedoms of others and the general welfare in a democratic society. And such limitations must be non-discriminatory, necessary, and proportionate to the achievement of a legitimate aim. The exercise of sexual rights must be guided by awareness of the dynamic relationship between personal and social interests, the recognition of the existence of plurality of visions, and the need to guarantee equality, dignity, and respect for difference. And the final principle, which is principle 7, says the obligations to respect, protect, and fulfill apply to all sexual rights and freedoms. Sexual rights and freedoms include core legal claims as well as access to the means to fulfill those claims. As with other human rights, states have obligations on three levels: one, to protect, two, to respect, and three, to fulfill the sexual rights of all. The obligation to respect requires states to refrain from interfering directly or indirectly with the enjoyment of a particular right, in this case with sexual rights. The obligation to protect requires states to take measures that prevent third parties from interfering with human rights guarantees. And the obligation to fulfill requires states to adopt appropriate legislative, administrative, budgetary, judicial, promotional, and other measures towards the full realization of the right. So these 7 principles are the frameworks that was used to draft out these sexual rights. And IPPF affirms that sexual rights are human rights, and they are constituted by a set of entitlements related to sexuality that emanate from the rights to freedom, right to equality, right to privacy, right to autonomy, right to integrity, and right to dignity, to integrity and dignity of all people. And in total, we have 10 sexual rights. And the first sexual right says right to equality, equal protection of the law, and freedom from all forms of discrimination based on sex, sexuality, or gender. When it comes to sexuality, we are big on non-discrimination. All human beings are born free and equal in dignity and right, and must enjoy the equal protection of the law against discrimination based on their sexuality, sex, or gender. And the second right says the right to participation for all persons, regardless of sex, sexuality, or gender. All persons are entitled to an environment that enables active, free, and meaningful participation in and contribution to the civil, economic, social, cultural, and political aspects of human life at local, national, regional, and international levels, through the development of which human rights and fundamental freedoms can be realized. So everyone has the right to participate on different levels, regardless of their sex, sexuality, or gender. And the third right says the right to life, liberty, security of the person, and bodily integrity. Everyone has the right to live. Everyone has the right to liberty, and everyone has the right to be free of torture and cruel, inhuman, and degrading treatment in all cases, and particularly on account of sex, age, gender, gender identity, sexual orientation, marital status, sexual history, real or imputed HIV status, and shall have the right to exercise their sexuality free of violence or force. And the fourth right says right to privacy. Everyone has the right not to be subjected to arbitrary interference with their privacy, family, home, papers or correspondence, and the right to privacy, which is essential to the exercise of sexual autonomy. And autonomy is having control over your own body. And the fifth right says right to personal autonomy and recognition before the law. Everyone has the right to be recognized before the law and to sexual freedom, which encompasses the opportunity for individuals to have control and decide freely on matters related to sexuality, to choose their sexual partners, to seek to experience their full sexual potential and pleasure within a framework of non-discrimination and with due regard to the rights of others and to the evolving capacity of children. So even as you want your own right to be protected, you also want to protect other people's rights also. And the fifth right says right to freedom of thought, opinion, and expression, right to association. Everyone has the right to exercise freedom of thought, opinion, and expression regarding issues on sexuality, sexual orientation, gender identity, and sexual rights without arbitrary intrusions or limitations based on dominant cultural beliefs or political ideology or discriminatory notions of public order, public morality, public health, or public security. Everyone has the right to exercise freedom of thought, opinion, or expression. It's a popular saying that everyone has freedom of speech, but you are not sure of freedom after speech. And there is freedom of speech, but we are not sure of freedom after speech. And articles the right 7 says right to health and to the benefit of scientific progress. Every being, every sexual being have a right to the enjoyment of the highest attainable standard of the physical and mental health, which includes the underlying determinant of health and access to the sexual health care for prevention, diagnosis, and treatment of all sexual concerns, problems, or desire or disorders. Everyone, everyone, every sex, every gender have a right to health. They have a right to sexual health care for prevention, for treatment, for diagnosis of all sexual concerns, problems, and disorders. And Article 8 says right to education and information. This particular right cannot be overemphasized. Every one of us needs to have a grounded knowledge on comprehensive sex education. Everyone without discrimination have the right to education and information generally and to comprehensive sexuality education and information necessary and useful to exercise full citizenship and equality in the private, public, and political domains. Everyone have the right to age appropriate sex education. Everyone, when people are aware, there will be a limit, there will be a reduction in abuses. When children are aware, there will be a reduction in sexual abuse. So right to education and information is very, very important. Very, very. And the ninth right says, right to choose whether or not to marry, and to found up and plan a family, and to decide whether or not how and when to have children. Even the Bible itself says it is not compulsory for everyone to get married. The Bible also says, is there anyone that wants to do something without first sitting down to count the cost? So you have the right to choose whether or not to marry, whether or not to found and plan a family, or to decide whether or not how and when to have children. You have the right to decide the number and spacing of your children freely and responsibly within an environment in which laws and policies recognize the diversity of family forms, as including those not defined by descent or marriage. And the final rights. Remember, I said we have 10 rights, 10 sexual rights, 7 guiding principles. Now, to the final sexual rights, right to accountability and redress. All persons have the right to effective, adequate, accessible, and appropriate educative, legislative, judicial, and other measures to ensure and demand that those who are duty bound to uphold sexual rights are fully accountable to them. When there is accountability, there will be results, because you would know who is responsible for this. This includes the ability to monitor the implementation of sexual rights and to assess remedies for violation of sexual rights, including access to full redress through restitution, compensation, rehabilitation, satisfaction, guarantee of non-repetition, and any other means. So, the reason why we want you to know your sexual rights is so you'll be able to demand this sexual right, and so you'll be able to protect this sexual right. And all, not only would you do this for yourself, you will also be able to protect your neighbor's sexual right. And when every one of us protect each other's sexual right, come on, we will have a sexually sane community. We will have a sexually sane world. There will be a reduction in sexual vices. There will be a reduction in unwanted pregnancies. There will be a reduction in sexual related illnesses like HIV/AIDS, syphilis, and gonorrhea, etc. So, this sexual right allows us to live as sexually sane beings. We know, we protect, and we demand. We know, we protect, and will demand. And not only do we demand, we also fulfill these rights. And we know those who are accountable. When these rights are violated, who do we meet? When these rights are violated, what is the guarantee that it will not happen again? So there is a right to effective, adequate, accessible, and appropriate educative, legislative, judicial, and other measures to ensure and demand that those who are duty bound to uphold sexual rights are fully accountable to them. They are fully accountable to them. I believe today you've been enlightened. You've learned a lot today. And this is brought to you by Orgasm Reform Institute. And everything I've been saying since morning, the sources we got, this information was gotten from IPPF, because they are the ones that set out the principles and entitlements of sexual rights. And the full text for all what I've been saying since morning can be found at IPPF Charter on Sexual and Reproductive Rights, and also on many international standards and reports of the United Nations human rights bodies. Can be found on the website of the United Nations Office of the High Commissioner of Human Rights. Also, Sexual Rights and Sexual Health by WHO and the Principles on the Application of International Human Rights Laws in Relation to Sexual Orientation and Gender